Hi, this is Michaela from Sanctuary Family Farms. I'm 19 years old and I'll be starting my second year of college courses this June. I think that sometimes whenever God says not right now, it's almost more difficult than a no. I'm a very all or nothing person. I've always been like this, so when God says, not right now, wait, I really struggle. It's like the concept of our parents saying maybe. Maybe typically meant no, and maybe later meant not ever. And this is exactly how I responded to that answer. I would throw in the towel, or temper tantrum, and instantly become disappointed. Even though I wasn't really given an answer, I would instantly lose all of my hope. But God doesn't work in maybes. God is just as much of an all or nothing person as I am. When He says yes, it's an absolutely yes. And when He says no, it's a heck no. This is something that I'm growing to understand. In our world, people are filled with so much wishy-washiness that I, for one, struggle to accept whatever answer I am given, especially when it's a yes. Did you say yes just to make me happy? Was it because I pressured you? Are you lying? Is this a joke? And because I'm so used to the way people are, because we're all imperfect, I confuse the nature of people with the nature of God. When God tells me not right now, is He saying never? When God tells me to wait, is He just going to jerk the rug out from underneath me? It's hard. I desperately want to trust God because at the very bare minimum, I know that God is perfect and isn't like us. But I'm still terrified that God doesn't either know or value what I want. But here's the deal. Hebrews 6:18 says that by two immutable things in which it was impossible for God to lie, we must have a strong consolation, who have fled for refuge to lay hold upon the hope set before us. And in Psalms 37:4 it says, Delight thyself also in the Lord, and He shall give thee the desires of thine heart. So obviously, if we just look at the Bible, my fears are not reasonable when it comes to God. God cannot lie, and He knows the desires of my heart. I can rationalize through this because it's right in front of my face, but waiting is still so hard. I have to actively choose to trust God because when I'm left to my own devices, I'll self-implode. I'll go back to being anxious, depressed, and miserable, waiting for God to just say, never mind. So I have to breathe, remind myself that my emotions and how I feel don't override God's truth, and go right back to my Bible. I don't have to know how long, God, or how on earth you're going to make it work. All I have to know is that you're going to be with me, and that you're going to follow through with it. God might say, wait, and it may not necessarily look the way that I expected it to look, but God will always fulfill His promises.
So, Michaela, that's great. A little about you, babe. Firstborn of all the
Yes.
grandchildren, right?
Yes.
Right? And it was, 6 years?
Yep, 6 years
before
before.
your sister came along.
Yep.
Okay. Now, you think about that for a minute. Usually when we have 6 years separating kids, okay, we really technically classify that as you're an only child.
Oh, I was an only child. I was spoiled rotten for those 6 years.
Yes, you were the delight of uncles and aunts and grandmas and grandpas, and you were just like the everything, weren't you?
Pretty much.
No, you were.
Yes, I was.
You were, pretty much, yeah, right on. Okay, so something struck me when I was reading that. Do you think sometimes that it is hard to go from where it's about you and people want to please you and sometimes they so want to please you, but they're maybe not honest about things, like you said, you're afraid they'll say no, because it's a duality in there. Because all the time they're thinking, I was thinking when I was raising you, I don't want to spoil that kid. I don't want to spoil that kid. And obviously I failed. No, but you're a great spoiled child. Okay, so do you think sometimes it is really hard when you're alone? Because you were alone, and now you're still the oldest, of course, of all the grandchildren. But do you think sometimes it's hard when you're alone to develop a relationship with God? Because it's not like your buddy.
Yeah, definitely for me that's been a hard part because as I've gotten older, probably about from the time I was 18, I've been working on my relationship with God, and it's really hard to have a relationship with something that you know is there, but you can't see it.
Yeah.
And I think as hard as they've been, when God has brought me through a lot of my struggles that I've had as I've gotten older, that definitely solidifies the fact that he's there. I just can't see him. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of those things that I'm constantly having to overcome.
It was pretty difficult when your little sister came along and trying to learn how to share, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, because I had absolutely no cousins, no nobody to play with, and all of a sudden there's this one, and then a year later there was another, and then a few months later there was another, and now there's 5 little rugrats running around, and they've taken all of my attention and toys. So yes. It was like a full 180.
Yeah, and imagine that's hard to go from Miss Primo or Miss Prima Donna to being the oldest one, and now everybody looks back and it's like they take up their cause because they're kids.
Yeah.
So they're important, and all of a sudden you switch places from being the most important person, the center of attention, to just one of 6.
Right.
And I imagine that's hard reconciling that in terms, because sometimes when I hear your blog, I hear this struggle in there of can I trust God to give me what I want, or is it like, no, Michaela, you can't have it anymore. You don't get it anymore. You're not number 1 anymore. You have to share and everything else. And I was just wondering, is that kind of difficult crossing your mind?
I definitely struggle with, is God going to give me what I want? Because I think sometimes I get in the mindset of, well, what if what I want is not what God wants? And then why do I want it? So it ends up being this back and forth thing where it's like, well, I really want God to give me that, but I also want what God wants for me, but I also really don't want to be disappointed. And so it's that cycle of what if? What does God want?
You think when people, like all of us, but do you think when people fear disappointment, then they have a tendency to withdraw from everybody because they don't want to be disappointed by the people?
Yeah, I definitely do that because I think of growing up, I struggled to have relationships with people in school, and for me it was, you don't like me? Great, I don't like you, we're done. And I kept people at arm's distance at very most so that I didn't get rejected. I would reject somebody before they could reject me.
But you were unique in the sense that you grew up with all adults.
Mm-hmm.
So you grew up not in a kid-friendly environment of understanding, but
right.
in an adult environment, right? But at the same time, we do recall a first-grade little girl who didn't like you that just threw you for a loop because she didn't like you.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't like you because she just didn't like you.
Yeah.
There was nothing you could do. You didn't do anything to her. She just didn't like you. Let's put it this way. She was really jealous of you.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of threw you for a loop because you're like, why would anybody not like me?
My mama loves me. My daddy loves me. My Nana and Pa think I'm amazing. Why don't you like me?
Yeah, and if they give me practically everything I want, then God should do the same, right? Right. Then we grow up and realize that we're a part of Him as much as He's a part of us. What does it say? Cast your cares on Him, for He careth for you. Mm-hmm. A two-way street in there. I think that's great, Mac, that you struggle with that, because a lot of times people don't struggle with it. They endure the pain, but they don't ever do the work to get stronger. Mm-hmm. But I think that's great insight. I think sometimes it's like, can you ever trust God that if you don't get it, you don't need it?
Right.
I mean, I know that I was overindulgent, but like you said, When I could do it, I always said yes with pleasure. When I couldn't do it because it wasn't good, it was like, heck no.
Right.
Maybe a little more forceful, but heck no.
Of course.
Of course. Great. Thank you. I appreciate your insights and I appreciate the time you talk because I think it's really beneficial to every one of us. Sometimes deep down in our hearts, I wonder if we're all not afraid of rejection at some point. So, but that's where God comes along and says, I'll never leave you. Thanks, Mac. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye.